I've met a lot of people who are like my dad, who thinks that he does not have time for fiction.
That I don't have time for fiction is that's really captures. It sounds like my father, who loves a good novel, but it's like, what are you reading right now? It's a 4-volume Lyndon B. Johnson, the 4-volume Lyndon B. Johnson book. It's like, why are you reading that? And he's like, I don't know very much about it.
Yeah.
So the question, he's like, he's on a knowledge quest.
Welcome back to Closing the Social Distance. Today, Father Clement and I are joined by our good friend, John Clarke, who's the editor-in-chief of Cluny Media. Good to see you, John.
Thank you, Father Henry and Father Clement, for having me on.
Many of you all will remember Father Paul Clarke, who's John's brother, who was inflicted on our parish during the past 2 summers, first as a deacon and then as a newly ordained priest. So we're happy to talk to one of the more enlightened Clarke brothers right now.
Yes.
So it's a great relief. But I hope that you and your family are doing well. We're talking to you in Providence, Rhode Island, right?
That's right. Yep, we're sheltering in place, doing all the things we are told to do. Not necessarily with a smile, but it's interior.
Again, that's very much like your brother. So, doing what he's told to do, but with only interior joy to console.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that John is the editor of Cluny Media. And you will remember our Aquinas Society summer reading program from last summer.
Yes.
Where we read through...
Basically sponsored by Clooney Media.
It was sponsored by Clooney Media. And I think
at its base, it was sponsored by us.
Absolutely. It was a great thing. But we had a bunch of great books that we were reading. Like we read The Dan England and The Noonday Devil, which you disliked strongly, if I recollect.
I don't know how much I disliked the book or how much I thought Dan England was a bad person.
That's fair. That's a fair distinction. But yeah, it was frustrating for you, I think, Dan England and the Noonday Devil. But it made for a fruitful conversation.
That is an essential component of a good reading group, is at least one person bucking the trend against a so-called lovable protagonist. So, Father Clement, you filled that role, because with a book like Daniel, I think we find this a lot with Mr. Blue, which is a great book. Yeah. It's hard to find a part of the book where people will say, "Well, I didn't like this," because it's a very popular book.
Sure.
But yeah, there's always, so you need, especially in a group, no one wants to be the person who says, "Actually, I disagree." It's like the person who doesn't wear a mask.
Now you are touching a sensitive spot. This is a perfect point. But I do think that's very true when you're reading things with other people, or discussing them. The tendency towards groupthink or to just universally indisputable propositions just absolutely crushes any meaningful discussion. Because unless there's disagreement, unless there's a breadth of interpretation, what's the point of just everybody saying things that no one could disagree with?
Right. Where's the fun in that? One thing that we always have with, at least in the acquisition process, and certainly in the branding and marketing component of putting a book together, we call it the BBC, the big broad claim, where at least one person has to make some outlandish claim where this is, the best book since Brothers K. Sure. It can have absolutely nothing, but it has to just take some category, which helps. I mean, it tends to enlighten the mood a little bit in what can be a very tense process.
Sure.
But it's also very helpful from the creative standpoint to be able to pick kind of the poles between which a book swings. And when you pick the extreme and say, okay, it is to Brothers K as Brideshead Revisited is to The Heart of the Matter, and you just pick it's all these. It's the top contenders that everyone knows, and you situate it there. And at least from our standpoint, when you're dealing with a book that very few people have read, Dan England would be one of those. It's a book that's hard to find. It gives you some reference points, I think, especially in a reading group, or even in a family. Probably the fundamental reading group of society. Who said that? Is that?
Did you just say that? The fundamental reading group of society? Yeah, I can take that.
Don't ask me what our fundamental reading group is in the Clarke household, because I think it is still things to see while out and about, which has about 4 words in it and terrible pictures. But it's
I think the fundamental reading group in the Clarke household is the individual, like the radical individual at war with himself, experiencing
the autonomous self is just the reading.
Precisely. Clooney Media is a pretty young press, like all things being equal. Y'all have been around for a handful of years now, but your catalog has grown tremendously. And you were talking about the book selection process. What's the thing that you're looking for? Like, what do you want to share with the world that other presses aren't offering?
Right. Yeah, we're 5 years old this September. Just about ready to go to whatever grade kids go to when they're 5. But what we started about was filling the empty backlog of Catholic books, Catholic literature. And over the years, we've refined that. And at this standpoint, we're looking back both what the kind of the operating principle was, and the one definitely in effect right now. Is approaching Catholic letters, broadly understood as both the intellectual and the literary traditions, and seeing it as a constellation, and seeing pinpointing which stars are missing here. It's like if you look at one of those little printouts where it's here's Orion's belt, and you can see it. When you look at that from a literary, and you think of that as kind of a metaphor for the literary landscape, you start to miss the certain parts of the sky are dark that shouldn't be dark, and so we started to build out those constellations and see, who, So I think we talked about this with reference to Dan England, but he has that chapter where he talks about all the literary greats, and he goes through his bookshelf, and that's kind of how we think about the acquisition process. So when we started, we did one of our earliest books was this one. I didn't even mean to do this, but it's Art and Scholasticism, which, as any Catholic literature lover will pretend to know, it was a tremendously influential book for Flannery O'Connor, and so we followed that one, and we found Caroline Gordon, who is Flannery O'Connor's editor and one of her closest friends, and her books had fallen out of print. And she's not one of those people who you would think of. Certainly, she didn't classify herself this way in the same way that even Flannery O'Connor did and Walker Percy did. But as one of the Southern Catholic writers, she very much permeated her literature with the Catholic vision. But that's someone you don't really come to unless you kind of track your way from Flannery to Art and Scholasticism, back to Flannery, and then back around again. But we have 2 of her books in the catalog, and another one coming. The 2 we have now are How to Read a Novel. I think is essential reading for everyone, because everyone reads novels.
At least you hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I kind of think of that as the bare minimum. If you're going to read anything, you have to read the novel. And then the next question is, how do you read it? And she challenged a lot of my presuppositions about what the point of a novel is. And then we have one of her own novels, The Malefactors, which is very challenging read, but very funny, darkly funny.
Again, very much like Father Paul Clarke, challenging but darkly funny. I think that we've been discussing this in the past on some of our earlier episodes of Closing the Social Distance. So many people feel stressed and strained. They feel like they don't have time to read, even during the lockdown, because of the demands of taking care of kids, of worrying about loved ones, of even the torpor that can set in, that makes you, think of your grand plans to conquer that bookshelf of untouched volumes and then give up, But really, reading is essential. Not just as a functional task, but as something to just be human. And that's why I love the fact that Clooney publishes not just, spiritual volumes like that Bernardo book from the Eucharist to the Trinity, but also novels and books on art, books of criticism, the underappreciated novel or the obscure screenwriting or biography. There's all sorts of stuff that I think nourishes the human soul, more fully, and that reading should really. You said novel is a minimum. I think that's very true. That's a foundation.
See, I kind of want. Well, I don't disagree with it in general, like that the
Good.
novel's sort of the basic literary unit. But I think in practice, though, I don't think it's quite that universal a norm. I think I've met a lot of people who are like my dad, who thinks that he does not have time for fiction.
Which is kind of, I think that's very common. I mean, I'm sure that if someone in the book world, you encounter that pretty regularly. It's like, oh, I wish I had time to read that, all that kind of thing. I mean, what's your sense of how, there's got to be something that, reading fiction isn't just the preserve of the wealthy and indolent, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I don't have time for fiction is, that's really captures it, because the approaching the prospect of reading, I think there's always an element of question there. You're looking for an answer to something. Depending on your state in life, I think the questions that you bring to reading when it's a novel, the novel I suppose is very existential. Matters. And I think, and certainly, Father, I don't know. Your father sounds like my father, who loves a good novel, but it's like, what are you reading right now? It's a 4-volume Lyndon B. Johnson, the 4-volume Lyndon B. Johnson book. It's like, why are you reading that? And he's like, I don't know very much about it. So the question, he's like, he's on a knowledge quest, and I think part of that about, it's a both. I think this is a both and. I think the novel. I'll stand by the novel as bare minimum, because I think there are existential questions in the, whenever you want to say the novel starts, but certainly in the last 100 years, there are existential questions that we're asking, the answers to which you don't really access as a normal person like me, or normal like the three of us, and all taken as a whole. But I think that when you were looking for things from a,
I'm really not sure. I'm actually really struck by the fact that this guy just claimed to be normal and then embraced all three of us in a thing of normalcy.
Well, that's how I cut my losses there, because it's either I'm not normal and you guys are. It's clearly one of us has to be. One group here has to be normal.
I like to think we're all very normal. Everyone else is just the freak, John. That's the cross here. Admittedly, Robert Cato, who did that 4-volume Lyndon Johnson, like a really intense and awesome set of books. You can lose yourself in it, and it is utterly absorbing, in a certain sense, because it's like a novel. It has such a defined literary arc to it. It does actually. I think Cato's kind of exhausting sometimes for his exhaustiveness, but there is a drama to it.
Well, then Father Clement, maybe I think we need to check Father Henry here, because there's a little bit. I think he's moving. He's kind of moving towards the novel as the fundamental aspect of all literature. I mean, he just argued for a 4-volume history book as a novel. Father Henry.
I'm a very lame. I read Trollope. I read Victorian novels. I'm used to being paid by the word, or at least authors who were paid by the word. It's like.
Well, and I think history has a certain novel-like aspect to it when it's well written, because what makes a well-written history book? It's narrative. What is it that you're contributing to the world when you're writing a history book? Is narrative. One of the best books that I've read recently, I guess within the last 3 years now, is this 2 books on the history of World War I by G.J. Meyer.
Yeah.
And what is so good about them is that he writes it as a narrative, as a with interesting characters, and he develops these real people in kind of the full character sense of it. And I think that's one of the things that comes across in novels that you don't get in kind of strictly nonfiction things, is that you get to understand more of the world because you get to put on somebody else's eyes. And so if you want to write nonfiction, you'll do a better job of that if you're talking about characters, if you're putting on other pairs of eyes for people.
I think that ideally, like the novel, like the spiritual book, like the history, is concerned with what's real. Which doesn't mean everything comes down to realism. It doesn't mean that you can't have a surrealistic novel or impressionistic, I mean, there's got to be a concern with truth, I think. Truth understood in many different ways, but what's most powerful in reading? I'll go back to Trollope. Going back to Trollope, what makes him a powerful writer? It's that sense in which, he's created this fictional universe, and it's like he puts a looking glass over a little bit of the earth, and you see people and things moving around, and you feel like he captures something of what it means to be human, or at least these types of humans. And I think that's true in spiritual reading too. Like, I mean, when I read a good spiritual book, it's not just, this guy's experience is detached. You feel like you're seeing something of what humanity is like when it comes in contact with God.
In Trollope, his world is so different. He's talking about a married clergy in England, in a cathedral town, and like the very idea that you can have a town that is like built up to be around an Anglican cathedral, like it's just so otherworldly for us but yet the characters, like I've met these people.
Oh yeah,
I know these people.
Yeah, no, I mean there is an Archdeacon Grantley in our province. There's every character that you can encounter. But we've been rambling on. Maybe we should let the book publisher tell us something about.
Yeah, what you both described, and I've been thinking of this when I first argued for a novel as the fundamental basis for reading. But when you're trying to track onto the unifying theme of reading as an activity, and what is it that unites the kind of speculative nonfiction, like a philosophical work, to a very substantial historical study, to a novel, is that recognition, shock recognition of truth being there, that whether it's self-representative as, I see myself in this person, or whether it's more an overarching thing, this is how the world works, that's true, or this is an experience or insight into the divine that I have not had, but I recognize as real and true. And it's about the presentation of it in the writing, but then it's about the experience of it in the reading. And if it's, because there can be all kinds of cosmetically appealing aspects to literature or to writing as such, but. And this is why I think very few people can remember, and by very few people I'm thinking of myself, that I can't remember the books that I bought in the airport and read on the plane, and then put in one of those lending libraries and never seen again. I love Tom Clancy novels, but I don't really remember which ones have which plot. And I think because there's a cosmetically appealing aspect to it and a certain intellectual bent. But ultimately, it's more about the entertainment than about the truth. And even in the entertainment, so you think of like a Pulp Fiction, like Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, those are still true, not because but the reason we enjoy them is because the presentation of the truth is done in such a compelling way.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable because it requires imagination, because very few of us have lived that kind of seedy side of Los Angeles in the 30s, rural, what have you. So I think that kind of explains some of the differences and how you can present literature. But I think unless there's that unifying theme present, and that's true, then it's very hard to see how you can have a culture of reading. And I think that's what we're looking for when we talk about what are we reading, why are we reading it, what are we getting out of what we're reading, is that you're looking to build something greater than your individual activity or even the sum of the parts.
I thought it was particularly fitting that you all named the press Cluny Media, because I mean Cluny was a medieval monastery, and it was the original Benedict option in a certain sense, if we want to give McIntyre a hat tip. But it wasn't just a matter of individuals kind of hiding away or storing up knowledge. It was the creation of a community that made possible the diffusion of truth and of the goodness, really, of what they were contemplating. I love that you all are Cluniacs. Like there's this treasure that sometimes seems tenuously preserved, because of the way that modern publishing works and the way that great stars in the firmament can be hidden or obscured. And Cluny is striving to take those polish them up, if I can mix the metaphors, and let them shine and gleam more brightly, and let that small kind of circle of people who read it grow and grow, so that it changes the way people know themselves and know others.
Mm-hmm. The original monks of Cluny, which someone pointed out to me when I say original monks, it makes us seem like we think of ourselves as monks, which would be so bizarre.
That would be bizarre, right?
Stop.
He says to the guys wearing habits, okay.
Yeah, but you are actually, you have legit cause. If I was wearing a rosary on my belt, please stop me. But I'm not.
No.
I won't stand up. You just have to believe me. But the original monks of Cluny, when they were working the scriptoria, preserving, copying down all the works, it was to preserve that original fundamental memory of where the West had come from. And what we did with why it's Cluny Media is it's a little bit abstractive, but books are the medium through which we are continuing that experiment that they started. There's all kinds of initiatives with the new media, but we like to think that this fundamental medium through which people articulate and understand their life, the full grand scheme of the human experience, is through literature, is through reading. And some people have said things well, and they need to be remembered. And what the monks were doing was a manifestation of their work and prayer, charism, and I think those are still the two things that, when it comes to books, how do you, going back to the reading group we were talking about, when you read together in a group, it can be similar to you reading as a church, as a parish. When you gather and you hear the words of Scripture, are very different from reading them on your own, and encouraging that with other books. There's a reason why we read Scripture out loud.
Yeah.
At the liturgy, it's not just because we got to fill the void.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Maybe you could speak specifically. People watching this, they say, "Okay, I hear you. I hear the argument y'all have been making for the past 15 minutes. I want to join that community. I want to be part of that circle of knowing. That circle of discussing and debating the truth. Where do you start? Like in the Cluny firmament. What's the first level? They go online. What do they get?
And I think that this is a really important question, because I think, at least when I talk to some of our more intellectual parishioners who are not from, who didn't go to like great book schools,
sure.
It can be intimidating because that there's this Western canon that you're supposed to have read.
Yeah.
That there are all these books, and you want to skip to the end, to the point where you've done all of that, and the fact that the here to there is so long, I think can intimidate us from taking that first step.
If you know that you can't win, why bother to begin? If you weren't going to capture it all, then why even start? But that's not the right mentality to have.
Because it's too many books, too little time.
Yeah.
I certainly think, as I would, that you can't go wrong picking from our catalog. And I'd be inconsistent if I didn't say, where do you start? We have pretty large offering of fiction in the Cluny classics aspect of our catalog, and I would recommend, if you're coming looking to build that foundation, start with one of the novels. Start with the Caroline Gordon Malefactors novel. Start with Miles Connolly's Mr. Blue, or Dan England and the Noonday Devil. Start with the Francois Mauriac if you are inclined. Yeah, Viper's Tangle. These are that's again challenging and darkly funny. Is that what we said?
I think
it's more just challenging and dark, less the funny. But Viper's Tangle is an incredible novel. It lends a certain direction towards your reading. So I would be, if I had to pick three books from our catalog that to read right now, it would be Miles Connolly's Mr. Blue. It would be the Joseph Pieper book, The Weight of Belief, that we have. Pieper, I always thought of Pieper as intimidating. He's one of the intimidating ones. I did not find those essays intimidating. The fact that they're written between 72 and 85, I think, they may as well have been written right now. And there it is.
The weight of belief, just because we actually have a whole stack of great Clooney books here. They're beautifully done. Like it's just a very handsomely done book too. Like it's a pleasure to actually just open up and let your eyes go over the page. So these are not cheaply produced books. Pieper is awesome, and this book is not easily found. It's a wonderful collection of essays.
No, it was one of those where he has so many books, and that's another thing. It's not just here are for authors who've been forgotten. It's here are authors we all household names in some areas, or just very commonly cited and referenced thinkers. But they have so many works and so many different collections, and those are his essays, and then there are a couple of addresses he gave at universities that have been brought together, and those kinds of works that just kind of fall through the cracks of someone's bibliography.
Yeah, I have to mention his other short one, What Catholics Believe. I have really liked this book to give to people who are struggling with first coming to grips with the Christian faith.
Because he just walks through the creed, pretty much line by line, and that one, from a parish standpoint, it's a great one for catechumens and for RCIA classes, because it just it's not. I wouldn't really characterize that as a work of apologetics, because I don't think it doesn't really have an argumentative tone to it. It's much more just the presentation of the material. This is what we believe. Period.
Yeah. This is what reality is.
Which I think is refreshing, because I think with apologetics and when you kind of looking at like the Chesterton and C.S. Lewis era of presentation of Christianity writing, it was a different age, and the intellectual culture, I think, lent itself more to an argumentative bent, whereas today we argue a lot, but for very different reasons, if for any reason at all.
Yeah, no, it's true.
I've multiple times given a talk against apologetics, don't do apologetics, because that's not how the process of conversion works, right? It's not like you get tricked into believing that. Well, I think the mode of evangelization is friendship, and so to focus on arguing back and forth about truth as if though you're going to convince somebody of belief in God is a mistake. I think giving a whole presentation of why you're in love with God, why you're in love with Jesus, I think is the...
Sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know some people who have been radically convicted by truths that have been presented in a striking way that have cut to the quick, that have gotten to the core. And even just, in a certain sense, reversions, people who have realized anew what the church actually teaches, or what the truth of who God is, and it shakes them up. But I do think that as a polar picture, it's never just an argument. It's a world, it's a way, it is a friendship, that you're invited into. And so, there isn't that's why there'll never be a magical, book just written by human beings that will answer every question or that will resolve every dispute.
There's just a whole bunch of magical books, and you have to read every single one of them, and they all happen to be in the Clooney catalog. So
conveniently. Well, I do want to remind our viewers that you can click below. I think is that am I doing this right? I click below, maybe above, something. You click somewhere around here, you will see a link to the Clooney Media homepage. If you're here in Cincinnati, near Madeira, I know that the Catholic shop, headed up by Dan Giroux, stocks a lot of Clooney books, and if there's a particular book you want to get and you want to go through him, he will help make that happen too. So feel free to give them a call or drop by once they're open. But where do you hope, John, as a closing word, Clooney Media goes next? What do you really hope for this company, for this publishing house?
I certainly hope that the need people feel to read never goes away, and I think it only gets sharpened by and spurred by this particular moment. I think there's a tremendous need for good food in the literary realm, and bringing back recipes that people might not know. I think when it comes to to looking where we want to be. It's that we're doing what publishers have always sought to do since the printing press began, which is to supply the message of the human mind, whether that's in the insights it's gleaned, whether those are divine, received through divine inspiration, rare, or just from observation and experience. But there is that's a personal example. I've been a father for almost 2 years, and there's just not enough. There aren't enough words to describe the vastness of that experience, and that's why you have to keep reading, because there's always a new presentation of something, and you realize that's well said. Now that describes it, and you can grow from there. Maybe there are other means to achieve that kind of growth. I've found it in reading, and I think that the course of history has shown that that's a lot of people have. And I hope that as people avail themselves to the good food of reading, that it says Clooney on the spine more often than not. That's where I would like it to go.
Amen. Well, thank you, John. It's been great talking to you, and I hope that many of our friends and viewers take a gander at the awesome offerings at Cluny Media's giving, and sign up for your all's mailing list, and generally stay abreast of all the wonderful things that are both available now and they're coming down the pipe.
Amen. Yes, thank you, Father Henry. Clement, thanks so much.
Of course, from all of us here at St. Gertrude's, as part of closing the social distance, remember that we're praying for you. Hope that you're remembering to pray for us too. Look forward to being with you soon, and in the meantime, happy reading, happy praying, and we'll talk to you next time.